when I started looking at the return on equity and when I started realizing that I could do better in multifamily, that I could get higher return on those dollars, it was an easy decision to sell.
There is a new American dream. One that doesn't involve working till you're 65 before you start enjoying life. If you're someone looking for ways to regain control over your time and check off that bucket list now, you're in the right place. We share tips from experts on investing, personal finance, and mindset so that you can finally have the freedom to work less and live more. This is the Freedom Investing Podcast with your host, Kris Toribio.
What's going on, everyone? This is Kris Toribio here with the Freedom Investing Podcast, and I'm so happy you're here to join us for another amazing episode. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the show. Please make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with our latest episodes. Moving on to today's guest, we have Brian Briscoe. Brian is a retired Marine that now helps people invest in apartment buildings. He's the director of the Tribe of Titans, a multifamily educational community, as well as a podcast host and general partner of over 600 apartment units. Brian, welcome to the show, brother. Before we dive into it, give us a quick 2-minute rundown of who you are, your background, and where you are in your journey to achieving time freedom.
Hey, thanks, Kris. Appreciate it. So, on to the last question first. Where am I in time freedom? I work from home. My commute is about 28 stairs and an extra 30 steps. So that part's taken care of. I've got a little bit of passive income coming in. I got enough to pay the bills, and I still work for lifestyle is where I'm at. So I grew up in Utah. I think that's a good place to start. I graduated from the University of Utah. I went on a 2-year mission for my church. Went to graduate school at the University of Minnesota, and less than a month after starting a PhD program in math, the World Trade Center went down. September 11th happened, and I decided to join the Marine Corps. So didn't realize that I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. I had originally intended on doing, a 3.5-year commitment, which is, all I had to sign up for when I joined is 3.5 years. And turned out that I did 20. So I retired in October 2021, which was, October 31st, which was a month and 20 days after the 20th anniversary of September 11th, if that tells you anything. But along the way, I started picking up a couple of properties, and I think, everybody who talks about multifamily will inevitably mention Rich Dad Poor Dad. So around 2004, 2005, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I read Cash Flow Quadrant, and I started thinking, man, I really need to start acquiring assets. At the time, I lived in Okinawa, Japan, and I just hit the pause button. I thought, you know what? It's too hard to invest from overseas. So I'm just going to wait until I come back to the States, and then I'll start investing. And then 2006, I landed in California. And fortunately, I did not buy a property there. In 2006, 2006, we saw prices, we saw what we can get for rent. And for some reason, my spidey senses were tingling. I'm just like, no, I'm not going to buy here. I'm not going to buy here. Something that just doesn't seem right. Didn't really understand the market dynamics, but we ended up buying a rental property in 2007 in my hometown, which is just north of Salt Lake City, Utah. And then after the market crashed, 2008, 2009, I don't remember which year. I think it was 2008, October 2008, we closed on a property in San Diego. After the market had crashed, we didn't quite hit the bottom, but we definitely, missed a lot of the losses. But long story short, I intended to keep on buying properties. Lending was a little tight, and I kept on getting no's from banks. Didn't understand that I could still figure out a way to creatively purchase real estate at the time. Didn't understand other people's money. I understand it as a concept, but what I didn't understand is that I could actually do it. And so I kind of put my investing on pause for a couple of years, just managed, 2 rental properties, ended up buying a third about 10 years later. But started getting the idea of, okay, I'm getting ready to retire in a couple of years, or at least I'm eligible to retire. This is me speaking like 4 years ago. I got 3 years till I'm eligible to retire. I really want to do something real estate related. And I started doing a lot of research on how to scale. And for some reason, purchasing hundreds of single family units didn't appeal to me. And so I started trying to think a little bit outside of that box and ran across multifamily, started binge listening to podcasts about multifamily, got into a coaching course, and eventually found a couple of properties that we were able to get under contract and close on. Formed a partnership that is coming to its end right now, but formed a partnership where we closed on 9 different properties. And then outside of that, a couple months ago, closed on a little Augusta property as a key principal and as a mentor to some new real estate investors, which is pretty cool too. So that's the basic rundown. So retired Marine officer, turned real estate investor.
That's fantastic. And first and foremost, thank you for your incredible service over the past 20 years. That's amazing. And congratulations on your retirement this forward.
Thank you.
There was a ton of that happened there within this time, though. Let's unpack that a little bit, right?
So 20, that was like 45 years in 2 minutes. So unpack whatever you want.
So you were in Okinawa, and that's when you first read and came across The Rich Dad Poor Dad and The Cash Flow Quadrant, which for many is a very impactful book. There's a reason why a lot of it referred to as the Purple Bible is because of the impact that it has, not necessarily on strategy, but more so mindset on what you can potentially achieve by choosing to invest in alternative assets. Were you investing in the stock market at that time, or were you just realizing like, I'm not even going to invest in this, I'm going full blown into real estate?
I was investing in almost nothing. I think I had, in the military, you have a version of a 401k. I think it's a 403b is what it's called, but it's the thrift savings plan. I was investing there, and the default option was a bond fund. At the time, I was also buying U.S. savings bonds at a rate of $100 a month. And that was the extent of my investing at the time, just because I didn't know. My parents didn't do a lot of investing. They didn't talk about investing. The advice I got from my dad about money was he basically told me that he had never figured it out. And so if I wanted to learn about money, I needed to find someone else to teach me. And that's the extent of my, financial education growing up. So I was not investing very much. The savings bonds ended up being absolutely key. A little later, my first property, I cashed in a whole stack of savings bonds, and it was exactly what we needed to close on the property. This is still at the time where you could get almost 100%, LTV on loans pre-crash. So I was happy that I at least was, putting $100 a month away, because I think it took about $4,000 to close on a property with 100% LTV at the time. But and then I was investing in the TSP. In the second house we bought as a rental, we moved in for a couple of months. Took advantage of some military clauses in it's the Soldier and Sailors Civil Relief Act. Basically says, if you're military under orders and moving, a lot of the residency clauses in mortgages don't really count. So I knew that I was going to be moving when I bought that house, and I actually had my exit orders in hand. So I bought that house. We used our TSP. We took a loan against our TSP for the down payment on that one. And we were able to do that because we actually moved into the house, and so we moved into the house for a couple of months, moved out, turned it into a rental. And we had one single tenant for the 8 or 9 years that we had as a rental. So the little investing that I did at the time was actually beneficial later in starting real estate. But I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I did what I knew how, and that's payroll deductions. I'm going to do a couple payroll deductions and start investing.
That's huge though. And we kind of leveraged a similar strategy when we purchased our first house hack here in Chicago, in that I actually didn't have a job when we purchased our first property. Luckily enough, Angela, my wife, was able to qualify for the property on her own. But the way we funded the down payment while I was in the middle of anesthesia school was we took a loan against our 401k. And I think that goes hand in hand with some of the teachings in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and saying that if you don't have capital to invest, instead of saying, I can't do it, it comes down to asking yourself and reframing the question to, how can I do it?
Yeah.
And for us, it was leveraging what investments that we did have at the time that we initially thought were not liquid until 65. And we're able to put that towards the first property, which
I
makes
was
a huge
I was
difference.
actually extremely fortunate. I mean, we had a real estate bubble and we had a stock market crash, 2007, 2008. I took most of my money out and we bought a short sale and we were actually in escrow for almost a year. And so what ended up being really fortunate is we were able to renegotiate the price down, as the market kept on sliding. But I took my money out of the stock market before it crashed. So, I mean, it was just one of those, blind luck types of things where, I had a lot of money in index funds, and ended up taking that money out. So I didn't get the big losses that happened, 2007, 2008 in the stock market. But I was able to buy real estate at, a dirt cheap price because, yeah, I already had taken the money out of the real estate, out of the retirement fund, and it was just sitting in my bank account at the time. And, looking back at it, the bank account was probably the safest place for that money at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that kind of came together there to
Mhm.
achieve that level of success at that time, and
Yeah.
that's good that that worked out. So when it came to purchasing those first few assets, you were
Mhm.
in California. Were you managing some of these remotely at any given point, or I know the first one you moved
Yeah.
into at Utah, but what about the other ones?
We went back and forth between self managing and having a management company, and it's I hear a lot of investors complain about management companies on single family homes, and we had a lot of complaints, but I've since come to grips on that one. We were paying a management company, $100 a month, and once I turned it around and said, how much work would I do for $100 a month? The level of service that I got from the management company actually made sense. But for a while, we tried managing it ourselves, and it ended up working well when we were, at least in the similar time zone. We ended up overseas a couple of times for a couple of stints, and usually when I went overseas, just because of the difficulty, we would get a property manager. But that was for the Utah house. For the San Diego house, we had one of our neighbors who was a real estate agent and property manager take care of the house for us, and she charged us a ridiculously low fee, and treated that property like her own. And honestly, she had several investment properties in the same neighborhood, so they just basically added that to their to do list. And like I said, we were very fortunate that they treated that like their own.
Let me ask you this: do you still have those properties in your portfolio today, or did you end up selling them?
I sold them. There came a point where I was looking at the return on equity on those properties. I had bought one in 2007, one in 2008, and 10 years later, I had six figures of equity in both properties. One property was cash flowing. It wasn't a strong cash flow play. I was getting about $200 a month on average after all the expenses. So with over six figures in equity, you look at the numbers and you're like, man, I'm getting about 2% return on my equity. I'm like, that's not a good number. The California property actually never cash flowed. But when we sold it, we ended up getting $140,000 in our bank account, which made it totally worth it. So when I started looking at the return on equity, and when I started realizing that I could do better in multifamily, that I could get higher return on those dollars, it was an easy decision to sell. So we sold those properties. Paid off. We still had student loan debt. We still had car payments. Basically, wiped the slate clean, and then used the rest. I remember I bought into a coaching program with it, and then invested low six figures into my first couple of real estate properties, or the first couple of multifamily properties that we had under contract.
I love that. And that's a really important metric. Actually, our previous episode with Ryan Johnson, we also touched base on the return on equity because a
Mhm.
lot of times people forget to realize that there's four pillars of real estate investing. It's
Mhm.
not just cash flow. You get cash flow, you get appreciation,
Mhm.
you get loan pay down, and you get the tax benefits.
Yep.
And sometimes the wealth generation doesn't come from one specific metric,
Mhm.
but a huge part can come from another one. So
Yeah.
in your case, it was equity.
It was mostly appreciation. I mean, because of those properties and the depreciation, I didn't pay federal taxes for a long time. I was able to, usually put about $10,000 to $15,000 in, passive losses against my active income, and so it definitely helped the tax situation out. Like I said, the cash flow is never significant, but knowing that the prices were going up, and honestly, there was a time with the San Diego house where we wanted to sell it, but we couldn't. We didn't quite time the bottom. We bought at 305, and if you believe Zillow, well, I was looking at all the comps in the neighborhood. It's a cookie cutter condominium, is what it was, but the neighboring condominiums were going at one point at 275, 280, and we bought at 305. So there were several years where we would have had to have paid to sell the property. And I figured that, floating $400 a month was a lot easier than coming up with $20,000 or $30,000 to try to sell it. So there was a time where we were just kind of limping along on that property, and just that experience and having to pay that every month was a lesson by itself. But yeah, end of the day, 8-10 years later, we put $150,000, $140,000, I think it was the number, $140,000 in our bank account when we sold it. So we ended up doing fairly well, even despite the, keeping it afloat month to month.
See, that's a huge concept that I think I'd want to really stress to our listeners too, is how forgiving real estate can potentially be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You purchased this property right amidst the downturn on the huge real estate market crash in history. And yet, at the end of the day, if you were just holding on to it long enough, despite even the negative cash flow situation that you were in, you were still able to come out on top when you sold the property.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a quote that stuck out to me that I heard once before, and there's no such thing as a bad deal in real estate. It ultimately depends on how long you plan on holding on to it for.
Yeah.
And that's a testament to it right there.
When we started investing in apartments, 2019 was our first acquisition, first 3 acquisitions actually. But it was pre-COVID, and we had an inverted yield curve, and everybody was talking about a recession. And I kept on going back to that. So we ended up getting a loan that, in hindsight, wasn't the greatest thing, but it's working out well for us. We got a 12-year loan on our first 2 multifamily properties, and they have a pretty stiff prepayment penalty. At the time, 2019, rates right now, people are complaining about, high 4s and low 5s for interest rates. 2019, in the beginning of 2019, 5.25 was probably the best you could get, so we're back into 2019 timeframe with a pending recession. And I remember, I look back and think, okay, what were the things that kept me in real estate, 4 or 5 years ago? And I keep on going back to the fundamentals. It's exactly what you say. Over time, real estate is going to continue to appreciate. It's going to continue to go up. You have leveraged returns, so a lender is going to give you 75%. So if over time a property goes up 10%, and your leverage at 75%, your returns are actually 4 times that. So, looking at the fundamentals, there may be hiccups here and there in the real estate market. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next month or the next 6 months. There may be, hiccups coming our direction, but as long as you can weather the storm, as long as you can keep yourself afloat, you'll end up doing well. I do think that you have to be careful about how much leverage you take on in times like this. Make sure you're not over leveraged. Make sure your, break-even occupancy is fairly low, but as long as you can pay that monthly mortgage and pay all of your expenses, you're going to make money in the long run.
I love that. And as someone who has weathered that storm back in 2008, and they say in markets like now, there's lots of money but no deals. But once the market turns for the worse and we go into a bear market, then now there's tons of deals available, but there's no money. Kind of taking your experience back in 2008, and as we're heading into a market correction in the near future, I guess what sort of insights would you give to people, or what would you have done differently to make sure you're able to take advantage of the new conditions?
What I'm trying to do is I'm still in buying mode. I think real estate over time is going to do extremely well. I think that anything that we buy in 2022 or 2023, if you add 10 years to the date, you're going to make a good return on. So I'm still in buying mode, but I think there's going to be a lot more buying opportunities. We were in an extreme seller's market for the last year or so, where sellers could insist on 2% EMD, 1% hard at contract. So there was there's a lot of things. There are multiple offers on the table for every apartment, offering, and sellers could basically take their pick of buyers, take their pick of prices, and that's slowly changing. We have a couple of properties of our own that we are selling right now, and we're not seeing the same type of offers that we were on a property we had marketed 6 months ago. So I think slowly the pendulum is shifting. So far prices have remained high. They haven't really dipped yet, but you're seeing more of that the sellers don't have as strong of a position because there's not 6 or 8 offers on every property. So in the near future, I think we are going to see a couple of more buying opportunities if you're careful and if you're still in the buying mode. But as the rates go up, more and more people are going to be out of the market. I think the pendulum is going to shift more so towards the buyer's side, hopefully completely towards the buyer's side. And then, like I said, I'll make purchases in the next year or so where it makes sense. But as I see that pendulum shift and rates come back down, which I fully believe they will, once that pendulum shifts and rates start going back down, that's the time where you pounce. That's the time where you really kick your acquisitions into high gear. So right now I'm working on, keeping my capital streams open, keeping my investor relations, wide open, keeping my network wide open. And so when there's buying opportunities, I can purchase myself. I can do the acquisitions myself, be a lead sponsor on a couple of deals, and then throw capital through various fund mechanisms to other people's deals.
Love that. And there's 2 points I want to ask you about. The first one being, you had mentioned back in 2008 that you were doing a lot of these things with your own capital, not realizing that you can leverage other capital, other outside sources of capital to potentially fund more deals. So this time around, how have you done things differently, or how will you plan on doing things differently, leveraging other sources of capital?
Yeah, I've made a concerted effort to put a lot out on social media. So mostly on LinkedIn, Facebook, sucks me in way too long every time I log on to Facebook, just almost unmanageable. But, I do a lot on LinkedIn, a lot of reach out. On average, I keep my calendar open for, 4 30-minute phone calls a day with potential investors. Also with people who want to get into the tribe of titans as well, but 4 to 5 phone calls a day with either potential investors or aspiring syndicators who want to learn from us. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm keeping that network warm. Some of these people are a little reluctant to invest right now for lots of reasons, but keeping my name out there, keeping my message in front of them, letting them know, hey, this is what's happening in the marketplace, giving them updates on how I see things happening. And, when we get a deal, be able to explain to them why it's still a good deal and why it's still a decent time to buy. And so, yeah, ideally, the money will be there when we have the deals. But right now it's just, I'm doubling down on, content. I'm doubling down on, the things that have worked for us to raise money in the past. And that's basically education, letting people know, hey, this is what's happening in the marketplace. Real estate is still a good investment. Even though the stock market in general, I think New York Stock Exchange down like 15% so far this year. I looked up the number a couple of days ago. I don't remember exactly what it is, but people are a little bit scared, when it comes to money. And right now it's just the education. It's like, hey, real estate's always been a hedge to inflation. Why don't you take some of that money and diversify out of market-based funds, which is what most financial planners are going to put your money in. So, yeah, a lot of education, a lot of outreach, and a lot of phone calls, and then a lot of emails, going out to the list.
Absolutely. And as someone who has been a consumer of that education, I would highly recommend reaching out to Brian Briscoe for any of those things, especially if you're aspiring to be a real estate investor yourself. Yeah. You run a great meetup, TGIF, on Fridays. Check that out, as well as the Tribe of Titans. The second question I had was more so with regards to your lifestyle. So at the time when you first started getting into real estate, you were still active duty. You were still traveling around various areas throughout the country and around the world. How did your life look like back then when you first started your first properties and you were managing your first properties? And of course, now as a retired Marine, how are you kind of running your real estate business differently now?
Yeah, I mean, night and day difference. At the time when I started, I had just moved to the Pentagon. I was pretty sure it was going to be my last duty station, my last move. And I was showing up to work every day at 7:30, 7:45, and leaving most evenings at 5 p.m. And DC, the commutes are always terrible in DC. So what my life looked like is I intentionally took public transportation into work instead of driving so that I could use that time to be productive. I mean, you can always listen to podcasts while you're driving, but you got to pay attention. You got to focus on the road. So I let somebody else focus on the road or focus on the tracks, I guess. And there's a metro station at the Pentagon. So basically what I would do is for that hour in the morning when I was going to the Pentagon and the hour in the evening when I was coming home from the Pentagon, I would use that time as wise as I could. And I used it either to learn or to underwrite or to plan or to write out emails or whatever. It's very common in most professions to have a lunch break, and I would take a lunch break every day. And most of my lunch break was, eating a Subway sandwich because there was a Subway across the hall from my office in the Pentagon, and sitting on my phone, tapping out more emails. So essentially what I was doing is every available minute of my day was used towards either my work, my real estate, or my family, or church. I did a lot of church volunteering as well. And essentially what I had to do is cut everything else out. I fiddled around with the guitar, the dad joke, by the way. But I remember hanging the guitar up on a shelf one day on the hook on the wall and saying, all right, I'm not going to touch this again until, I've got things figured out. And I still haven't really picked it back up consistently again. So really, I stopped doing everything else. That I put fences around my family. I put fences around, religious activities. And of course I had to do my day job. So everything that was outside any of those fences basically fell off my radar. And that's what I had to do to build the business. Right now, I'm still working, 40, 50 hours a week. But there's a lot more flexibility built in there. So if I want to do something during the day, I can plan it out. I've been meaning to do this for a while, but I've got a golf coach that I need to call and get golf lessons, and
Nice.
I've also got a guitar coach that I still need to call and get those guitar lessons rolled back in. But I've got a lot more flexibility right now. Like I said earlier, I got 28 steps between my bedroom and my office, 28 stairs, and another 30 steps. So it's a lot different. It's a whole lot different.
That's fantastic. And, I really just want to stress what you had said about really being intentional with your time. For those people who out there who say, I don't have time, I don't have time. The reality is we all have the same 24 hours in a day.
Mm-hmm.
What really you have to do is kind of force yourself to take inventory of what you are spending your time on and prioritizing what it is that matters to you most. And in your particular case, your lunch breaks, you prioritize your business. On the way to and from work, which was fascinating. I didn't realize that that's what you did for many years, was you intentionally took public transportation so that way you can focus on your business. That's huge. All of those things are huge. And that's I think a big impact that you can make on your life just from those daily routines that add up over time.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, entertainment, I didn't go to a lot of movies. I really stopped like Netflix. My rule during that time, which I still largely abide by, is, if I was watching Netflix, I was at the gym, or I was on my rowing machine, or I got a rowing machine and elliptical here at home. And it's like, if I want to watch Netflix, I'm going to put my gym clothes on and I'm going to sweat, but that's something I picked up during that time that I still practice. But it's just a matter of scheduling your priorities. And that's straight out of, Stephen Covey book. Don't prioritize your schedule, learn to schedule your priorities and do those things first.
Ooh, so, nice. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we are coming towards the end of today's show. There's been a ton of really good information here. But before we finish, it is time for the Freedom 5. These are 5 questions that we ask every guest on our show, starting with the most important question, which is, what is your why? What is the underlying motivation behind everything it is that you do?
There's a song that we sing in church is called "Because I Have Been Given Much, I Too Must Give," right? And I think largely I've been very blessed in this life. I have a lot. I have a lot of material stuff, and from here it's just a matter of giving back. If I never worked again, my family would still be fed. We would still have our basic needs, and that's an absolute blessing. So from here out, it's just try to raise everybody else to the same level. Whether it's through helping people passively invest in apartments and make good returns on their money, whether it's through helping people learn how to actively invest and to syndicate properties and be able to increase their incomes, or if it's just giving to charitable causes. That's really what I'm focusing on is being able to increase my influence, increase my income to raise the level of everyone around me.
That's huge. And what a gratifying life to be able to have that opportunity to do that. And how satisfying is that once you're actually able to help that for other people. So that's awesome. The second question here is, what book has had the largest influence on your life?
Ooh, the largest influence on my life, would have to be the Book of Mormon. It's the one that I read the most and the one that I keep reading almost every day. Aside from that, if you're looking for business, going back to the Purple Bible, just because that's what really unlocks certain things in my mind and let me keep going. Let me get into things that I didn't realize that I was capable of doing.
Yes, mindset's huge, and a lot of times they say the biggest limiting factor is between your two ears, right?
Mhm.
So it's a very powerful thing. Number three, what is the most impactful thing, whether that be a piece of technology, a habit, or a person, that has helped in freeing up your time?
Ooh. Geez. Helped in freeing up my time. I think it's just being intentional about planning. And I'm terrible. I try my best to do weekly planning. I've got my planner right next to me, but really it's just being deliberate with your time and making sure that your priorities are what you focus on. And um, this is a habit that I'm working on. A nightly reflection on, hey, how did my day go, and then a weekly reflection on how did my week go, and then a quarterly reflection on how did my quarter go. Those are all things that I'm working on, habitualizing. But really, when I am most effective, it's the times where every night I'm sitting back and I'm reflecting on my day and saying, okay, how can I make tomorrow better?
I love that. Yes, reflection is a huge key component that a lot of people do. We've actually started to try and take on meditation
Mhm.
because there's so many distractions that can go on in everyday life. There's always something that's going on, whether it be business, family, work, whatever it may be. And just freeing up even just 5-10 minutes in a day to just sit in silence and free up your mind to think clearly
Mhm.
um, can have a pretty big impact, both not on your
Yeah,
mood as well as your effectiveness.
absolutely, absolutely.
The fourth question here is, what is your number one piece of advice you would give to anyone looking to achieve more control over their time?
You control your own time. So you're already in control of your time. You just need to realize it. So if you're trying to control your time, start with controlling your time. Don't let other people control your time.
Love that. And the fifth question, what is the best way for our listeners to get in contact with you?
Right now we've just redesigned our website. It's about an 80% solution, but it's live. thetribeoftitans.info. If you go to thetribeoftitans.com, that'll get you to our landing page to actually become a member of the Tribe of Titans. But if people want direct access to me, join the Tribe of Titans. I answer every time somebody tags me in there in the platform. We use Mighty Networks. There's a lot of education on there. There's a lot of it's got a feed just like any social media network. But if you really want to get a hold of me in my time, join the Tribe of Titans. Tag me on something, send me a DM inside there, and I answer 100% of messages in there. At least I try to. I may have missed one or two that I don't realize, but that's by far the best way to do it.
Absolutely. And I fully concur with that as a fellow Titan. I highly
Yes,
recommend. Check it out. Tribe of Titans.
it's amazing.
All right, Brian. Well, we are getting to the end of our show. Ton of great information today. I really liked how you talked about your past and how you scaled into real estate investing, even working as active duty as a Marine, how you managed your time throughout the duration of your career, as well as how you are structuring your time now so that way you can focus on not only succeeding more in your real estate investment business, but also helping others succeed in their real estate investment business. So I just want to thank you again for being a fantastic guest. It's been really good chatting with you today, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Hey, thanks, Kris. Appreciate it. And should see you in person in a couple months too.
See you in a few months.
All right.
Now, if you like this show and want to learn more about how we can help you free up your time through passive real estate investments, check out www.freedominvesting.com. Make sure to subscribe to our monthly newsletter and schedule an introductory call with our team. We also have a free 7-day course on what passive real estate investing is and how to get started so that you can start your journey towards earning back more time in your life. To all of our amazing listeners here on the Freedom Investing Podcast, my name is Kris Toribio. Till next time.